Hello and welcome back to Comparative Religion. Again, my name is John Dryden and this is the first video lecture for week 2 from the course. Last week we simply went over the syllabus, did some introductions. I enjoyed reading the introductions you all wrote on the discussion board. And this video lecture will be the first lecture of actual content, and over the next 2 video lectures, I want to consider 4 questions to introduce ourselves to the course and to how we will proceed. Firstly, I want to discuss what religion is. This is, of course, comparative religion, and so religion is our subject matter, so we need to have some idea of what it is that we are going to be studying in the course. And Chapter 1, which you should have read by now, of course, discussed this question, but I want to go in a bit more detail than the book did. Secondly, we will talk about why religion exists, or another way of putting this might be, why are human beings religious? And so we will discuss the first 2 questions in this video lecture. And then in the next video lecture, we will consider the following 2 questions. How will we study religion? So religion is a subject matter, and there are multiple ways in which one can study religion and multiple legitimate ways of studying religion, but we simply cannot follow all of those ways in this course because our time is limited to 16 weeks. So we will discuss how we are going to proceed in this course. And then finally, in the next video lecture, we will look at why we should study religion. If we are going to spend 16 weeks studying religion, we should perhaps have some idea of the value that we could get out of such a study. So for this lecture, I want to focus on the first 2 questions, and then in the next video lecture, which you will also view this week, we will discuss the second 2 questions. So what is religion? Well, as the book mentions, and it's a bit of an embarrassment in religious studies scholars have failed to come up with a definition of religion that everybody can agree upon. And the reason for this, I think, is that religion is just an extremely complex phenomenon. There are wide-ranging activities that we would probably consider to be religious, but it's very difficult to identify what all of those activities might have in common. But to get us started, I want to consider 4 different definitions of religion, and I do not believe that all of them are satisfactory, but in discussing them and showing why they're not satisfactory, I think that will help us to achieve a bit better understanding of what it is that we'll be looking at in this course. So the first proposal comes from James Martineau, who writes that religion is the belief in an ever-living God, that is, in a divine mind and will, ruling the universe and holding moral relations with mankind. Now, Martineau is correct that some religions do have this belief, but the problem with this definition, as you may have already gathered, is that it is too narrow in scope. It is true for certain religious traditions, but it is not true of others. For example, later in the course, we will see that some forms of Buddhism would not hold this belief, and Confucianism does not hold this belief, and Taoism does not hold this belief. And so it is true of certain religions, but it excludes others. And so it is too narrow in scope. Additionally, even for the religions that it is true of, I think this would be true at least in their classical versions. It would be true for Judaism, Christianity, Islam, certain forms of Hinduism. But even for those that it is true of, it is only focusing on one element among many in these religious traditions, namely the element of belief. But religions are more than just a set of beliefs. They are more than just worldviews. They also involve action and characteristic emotional experiences and communal organizations. So he focuses on one element of religion but doesn't capture the essence of it. The second definition comes from John Dewey, the great American philosopher, who wrote that the religious is any activity pursued in behalf of an ideal end against obstacles and in spite of threats of personal loss because of its general and enduring value. Now, I believe that this definition has the opposite problem that James Martineau has. While James Martineau's was too narrow in scope, John Dewey's is too broad. And I say that because we can probably imagine certain activities that are pursued in behalf of an ideal goal or an ideal end that we would not consider to be religious. For example, we can think of certain political activities which are pursued in behalf of a political goal that might not be religious activity. And additionally, John Dewey again is only focusing on one element of the religious life, action, to the expense of other elements like beliefs, characteristic emotional experiences, and the like. The third definition comes from Friedrich Schleiermacher. This is a very famous definition. He writes that the essence of religion consists in the feeling of absolute dependence. While this is an intriguing definition, I think that it also suffers from some problems. First of all, it's a bit vague. It's not quite clear what Friedrich Schleiermacher means by this. But I suppose he is getting at the idea that in many different religious traditions, the believers have a feeling that their life, their existence, depends upon some other reality. And that is true of many different religious traditions, but again, Friedrich Schleiermacher is simply focusing on the emotional or the feeling aspect of religion, and that is just, again, one element among many. Now, I'm personally fond of the last definition. I don't know that it's a perfect definition, but I think it's better than the other three. Paul Tillich writes that religion is the state of being grasped by an ultimate concern, a concern which qualifies all other concerns as preliminary, and which itself contains the answer to the question of the meaning of our life. Now that is a bit of a mouthful, but I think what Tillich is getting at is that religion is having some sort of ultimate concern. So many of us have a whole host of concerns in our life. For example, I'm sure many of you all are concerned about learning the material from Chapter 1, but I doubt that that is anybody's ultimate concern. After all, you only have that concern because you have some higher concern, namely to do well on the first quiz. And you're concerned with doing well on the first quiz not as an ultimate concern, but because you have a higher concern of doing well in this class. And you want to do well in this class because you are concerned about getting a degree. And you are concerned about getting a degree perhaps because you want to get a job. And you are concerned about getting a job because you want to earn more money, etc. And so Tillich is claiming that, well, wherever this chain of causes ends, whatever is the ultimate concern that conditions all of the others, well, that is the religious object. And that is what gives meaning to our lives. Now, this might be a very broad definition too, but I think that it is true of many different religious traditions, and I think we'll see this notion of ultimate concern come up as we go forward in the class. So the book offers a working definition of religion that is in many ways echoes Paul Tillich's definition, and it's put in a slightly more simple format, so that's good, but the book writes that religion is human transformation in response to perceived ultimacy. So that is the definition that we will be taking in this course, but it's crucial to understand that this is simply a working definition. That is, the book is not claiming that this is the essence of religion. It's just claiming that this is going to be the definition we use for the purposes of this course so that we have some idea of what it is that we are looking at. So to explain this definition in a bit more detail, it's important to note, according to this definition, that religion is a human phenomenon. And one aspect of religion that I personally find fascinating is that it is, first of all, universally human, meaning that wherever you find people, you find religion. Now, it may or may not be the case that every human being is religious, but certainly wherever you find people, you do find religion, so it's universal in that sense. And secondly, it is uniquely human. That is, it seems as if human beings are the only beings that participate in the religious life. And so to study religion means to study something that might be able to tell us something about what it is that it means to be a human being. Secondly, religion is not just a human phenomenon, but it has to do with a process of transformation, a process of change. As we will see when we go through the course, the different religious traditions we look at will all claim that human beings are in need of change, in need of some sort of transformation. That there is something about human existence that is not quite right, that something is amiss, that something is out of joint with human existence in some way. And we are in need of change. Now, different religious traditions will identify what that problem is differently, but most, if not all, will claim that there is some sort of basic fundamental problem with human existence. And at least the religions that we'll look at will also claim that we can be transformed into a more ideal state of existence. So as we go through the course, we'll be wanting to identify for the different religious traditions we look at what is the problem of human existence and what is the goal of human existence, and how do we get from point A, the problem, to point B, the goal. What are the means by which we achieve this transformation? And then the third element of this definition is ultimacy, which is a kind of technical term in religious studies. It's basically what Paul Tillich referred to as ultimate concern, but ultimacy refers to that which a person or group perceives as having ultimate value, that which conditions and gives meaning to all of existence. So whatever it is that is of ultimate importance, of ultimate value, of ultimate concern, that is the religious object, and religion is transformation in response to what people perceive as having ultimate value. So the book also offers this framework for studying various religious traditions and comparing them, and this is a framework that we will come to over and over and over again in the course. But it basically gives a list of kind of universal questions that all of these different religious traditions will ask, although they will answer them in different ways. And we will be concerned with comparing their answers to see how they are alike and how they are different. But first of all the traditions we'll look at will give a vision of what it means to be a human being. Who are we essentially? Are we essentially souls? And our body is something that is just not essential to who we are? Or are we both body and soul? Or are we purely physical? Or something else? So different religions will give different answers to that question, but they will all raise the question. They will all give an answer to the question of what it means to be a human being, and also what it means to be a human being in relation to other beings. That is, are human beings in some ways significant among other beings? Are they in some ways privileged or not? Or are they more on an equal playing field with other beings, other animals and plants, for example? So we'll be looking at these religious traditions for what they tell us about what it means to be a human being. And then we will also want to know what they consider to be the basic human problem. What is the basic problem of human existence, and what is the cause of this problem? So some religions will claim that the basic human problem is our separation from God. Others will claim that it is suffering. Others will claim that it is alienation from others. And they will also identify a cause of this problem, sin or disobedience or our own egotistical desires. So multiple answers to these questions will be given, but it's something that we're going to be exploring as to how these different religious traditions address these issues. Next, what is the end goal of transformation? Each of these traditions will offer us a vision of what ideal existence looks like. And they will also offer a means by which we go from the problem state to the end goal of transformation. So we'll want to know what are the means of transformation. Also, we'll want to know what their vision of reality is. This is a question I want to pause here on for a moment because it's a good example of a question in which the answer to it will drastically shape one's attitude. For example, consider the nature of time. Some traditions will claim that time is linear, that is, that time is like a line. It has a beginning point and it has an end point. And our lives are linear in the sense that they have a beginning and they have an end, and that's it, and you only go around once. Whereas other traditions will see time in a circular fashion. They will claim that the universe is eternal and just goes through cycles of change, but doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end. And our lives are the same way, that our lives, we've been around before and we'll go around again. And so two different ways of viewing the nature of time and our lives in time. But you can imagine how different an attitude toward life one would have if they accepted the first version rather than the second. For example, if you think that you only go around once, well, your life will suddenly take on a greater sense of urgency than it might be if you thought that you had multiple lives to live. So the answer to that question of the nature of reality is a good example of showing how answering these questions fundamentally shape human attitudes. The last question is, what is the sacred? What do these people perceive of as having ultimate value? Is this God? Is this some sort of impersonal force? Is it social harmony? And how may it be known? How does one come into contact with the sacred? Is it through meditation, mystical experiences, divine revelation? So different answers to that question as well, but this basic framework of questions, as we will see, is one that all these different religious traditions will look at, will address in one way or another. I want to add on a little bit to what Chapter 1 discussed by mentioning that the basic worldview of the nature of human beings and the nature of the human problem and the ideal state of existence, these worldviews are expressed in different forms. And each religion that we will look at will make use of all of these forms. And so I want to just briefly go over the three main ways that religious worldviews are expressed. The first is mythological, and it is, first of all, important to note that in this course and in religious studies in general, we use the term myth in a very specific and technical way. So in common usage, myth sometimes has the connotation of being untrue, but in religious studies that's not what at all we mean by myth. By myth we simply mean a sacred story, a story that relates to whatever people perceive as having ultimate value. and we will see all the different religious traditions will make use of myths, will make use of sacred stories. And the practitioners of these various religious traditions will see their own individual life story in terms of these larger sacred myths, in terms of these larger sacred stories. So individuals will kind of connect their own life story to this larger master story. So for example, Christians will view their life somehow in terms of the story of the life of Jesus, or Muslims see Muhammad as being, and the life of Muhammad and the story of Muhammad as offering a ideal to live up to, or the story of the Buddha, as we will see, expresses the basic Buddhist worldview. So all of the religions that we will look at will make use of these sacred stories that people identify with in some way or another. The second universal form of religious expression is the theoretical. And the theoretical is much more abstract than the mythological. So this is basically the abstract doctrines of each religious tradition. So this is making use of abstract theories, abstract doctrines, abstract thoughts about the nature of reality, the nature of human beings, the nature of the divine, etc. And then the third is the practical expression, which is the way in which these worldviews are put into practice and the ways religious practices express worldviews. So here I'm thinking primarily of rituals and living a certain type of moral life. So all of that would be wrapped up into the practical. And so as we go through the course, we'll take a look at worldviews expressed in a variety of forms. But the religious map of human existence that is expressed through these forms are made up of symbols. That is, of words, ideas, or rituals, or pictures, or gestures, or sounds, or social groupings that evoke a sense of what is ultimately valuable. And these symbols help to transform the self and society in conformity with that ultimate value. And I'll be saying much more about symbols as we go through the course, and I'll give examples as we go along the way, but it is crucial to understanding religious traditions to see the way symbols operate in those traditions. Just one quick example I think will be helpful. In Hinduism, one common practice is called the puja, which is a practice in which a Hindu prays to and offers food sacrifices to what appears from the outside as being a statue of a deity. And if we are not clear that that statue is a symbol, that is, that it represents something beyond itself, then we will make the mistake of thinking that the Hindus are praying to a piece of clay, when in fact they are not praying and sacrificing to a piece of clay, but they are praying and sacrificing to what that piece of clay represents, to what it symbolizes. And so as we go through the course, I'll be pointing this out in more detail as we go along, but we will see that symbols are the primary language of religion, because the ultimate object of these religious traditions are oftentimes something that can't be directly seen. And so symbols are needed to evoke a sense of the object of these religious traditions. Okay, the second question that I want to consider is, why does religion exist? So we have maybe a little bit of an idea of what religion is, but the second question is, well, why does religion exist? Why are people religious? And I have listed here a number of different popular responses to the answer to that question, and I am not going to take a stance on this. I'm just going to offer you various proposals, but for your own consideration. But the first is the materialistic perspective, which claims that humans invented religion. It's called the materialistic perspective because people who take this approach claim that there is no spiritual reality, that there is just material reality, and human beings invented the idea of the spiritual. That is, they invented God. They created God or the divine in their own image instead of the divine creating them in theirs. And so this is a perspective that's oftentimes associated with figures like Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, but people who take this perspective are generally have a negative view of religion because they see it as being delusional, that people have invented this and then they believe it. The second perspective is not quite so critical of religion. It's called the functional perspective, and this claims that religion exists because it's useful. So from this perspective, whether or not religion is true or not is not really so important, because even if it is not true according to this perspective, it's still useful. It still provides useful elements. It binds people together, perhaps, or it provides psychological consolation. So the functional perspective claims that religion is valuable even if it's not true. It has certain uses. The third perspective claims that religion exists because there is some sort of ultimate reality. So this is the belief perspective. So religion exists because there is this spiritual realm that religions come into contact with. The fourth perspective claims that religious experience is a basic human phenomenon and cannot be explained in terms other than itself. So the phenomenological perspective claims that the materialistic perspective and the functional perspective are misguided because they try to explain religion away in terms of perhaps its psychological uses or its sociological uses. The phenomenological perspective claims that it's just a basic human experience. Religious experience is just something that's basic to being human and should just simply be described, not explained away. So those are different perspectives on why religion exists, and I'll just let you think about those for yourself. But another way of asking this question is, why are humans religious? So I mentioned earlier that it is only human beings who are religious, and one way of thinking about this is, well, what is it about human beings that make them distinct that might give us a clue into why they are religious? And one popular answer to this question is that human beings, unlike other animals, are self-aware, that they are not only aware of their surroundings and their environment, but they are aware of their own selves. That is, they can turn their attention onto themselves, and they are aware of certain features of their own life. For example, they are aware, they can kind of project themselves into the future and imagine their own death, for example. So human beings have an awareness of that, whereas it's not so clear, at least, that other animals are as keenly aware of that. And likewise, human beings can remember the past in a way that other animals cannot. So it's the mental ability of being aware of oneself to a much greater degree than the animals are, which might provide a clue as to why human beings have this religious impulse, whereas other animals do not. Okay, that is all for this lecture. Next lecture we will talk about how we are going to study religion and why we should study religion. Thank you.